This morning's lesson. It's good to see everybody. I hope everybody had a good week. Cooled off a little bit again, but hopefully there's some warm weather in the future. I hope. I'm ready to get in the garden, like Brother Tim and I were talking about. Again, it's good to see everybody. If you will, let's go to our Father in prayer before we begin. Our most heavenly and righteous Father, Lord, we humbly bow this morning, thanking you so much for this opportunity for us to come into this house and to study your word, Father, and sing your songs and hear your messages that are prepared. Father, we're so thankful for the freedom to do so. Father, most of all, we're thankful for your Son, Jesus, and all that he did for us on that cross, that one day that we can all live forever in heaven, and we're just so thankful for that, God. This morning I ask for forgiveness of the sins that I have in my life, that this lesson, this prayer, Father, is acceptable in your sight, Father. And we just ask that you'll go with us this morning and open our hearts and our minds. And Father, I pray that you'll speak through me, that someone out there may hear these words and come home to you, God. Again, we just thank you for this opportunity. We love you, and we ask these things in your Son's blessed name. Amen. First let me say thanks to Dickie for covering for me last week. I appreciate it. And today I'm going to start on in the book of Job. And kind of keeping with the last lesson that I had was questions, that Jesus was asking Peter, and I just kind of searched and went through and trying to figure out what I wanted to learn next and talk about next, and I kept coming back to Job and the questions that God had for Job later in the book, and I wish I had started on this, and I might get through this today. I'm not sure. We all know the book of Job. We all know the story. But after studying this book, you could spend weeks on this book. There's more to it than what I had ever read and understood. And so hopefully I can do it a little justice, and hopefully I don't breeze through it too much, because I was ultimately trying to get to chapter 38, 39 at the end of the book. So I'm going to leave out a bunch today, kind of in the middle, and I apologize for that. But we don't know who wrote it. Really not sure when it happened, and kind of unsure where it fits in. They say somewhere maybe the 1100 BCs or earlier, and again, not sure where it fits in. Some say maybe the period of the judges, and some say around the patriarchs. So a little uncertainty there. We don't know a whole lot about Job. So the book starts out in chapters 1 and 2, the prologue, and this is where we learn what we know about Job. And the testing of Job by Satan is revealed to us in these chapters, and it goes into pretty sharp detail of the undeserved suffering. And again, that's the million-dollar question that we have, is why? Why do good things happen, or why do bad things happen to good people? And we truly never get the answer to that question, but I think the answer that we do get from this book is far greater. It's true that every person, not only the Christians, they experience pain and suffering at some point during our lifetime. And then hopefully today that we can learn from Job and his integrity and how we should keep our trust in God, and most of all learn the sovereignty of God. So let's talk a little bit about where we are. The context of it is, this is prior to Christ's suffering and the redemption that we have with the cross. And so Job obviously knew nothing of that. he obviously knew nothing of the exchange between, what we'll read in a minute, between God and Satan. He knew nothing of that. They were still under the mind that it's kind of a cause and effect, if you will. You reap what you sow kind of deal. And you can still see a little of that when you get into the New Testament, when the disciples asked Jesus about a certain blind man. They said, did this man, did he sin, or was it his parents? And that was just how that was the law there. So beginning in verse 1 there, we see this blameless and upright man, a man, he was incredibly godly, so godly that God even took note of it. Verse 1 and through 3, it says, in the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. So God took note of that. And, but Satan sought to attack God's integrity by attacking Job and his integrity. And as we go down to verse 6, I'll read verse 6 through 12. So one day the angels came to present themselves before God, and Satan, or an adversary, it may say, also came with him. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered him, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth, looking for somebody to trip up. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. So he's acted as like the only reason that Job obeys and honors God is because he's bribed by the blessings that he has from God. And then that whole conflict between God and Satan, he knows nothing about that going on behind the curtain, if you will. He knows nothing about that. So God gave him that permission. And, Job doesn't know it, but he's fighting God's fight for him, so to speak. And I just wish that myself and us, when someone comes to me and comes after me, they will find us faithful as well. But he wanted to prove a point that Job served him out of a whole heart. It wasn't just because of the wealth and everything that he had. It was from a whole heart. And then we look below that there at the stuff that is taken from Job, and it's quite staggering. So in verse 14, it says, a messenger came to Job and said the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I was the only one left. Next verse there is another messenger came in right after and said the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one that escaped. The next verse, and then another messenger came in and said the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels. And they made off with them, and they put the servants to the sword, and I was the only one that escaped to tell you. And this is the big one. Then verse 18, he said, yet another messenger came in, and your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed on them, and it killed every one of them. I was the only one to escape to tell you. Now, do you think that's a tornado? A whirlwind? Is that possibly, you would think? So just tragic, you know. He lost his adult children who he loved dearly, and it talked about earlier in the book, you know, how much love he had for them and how much love they had for each other. You know, all his wealth, the servants and the livestock was how they were judged. Their wealth was judged, and he was an incredibly wealthy man. And he lost it in such a one day, you know, or one afternoon. And this next couple of verses here is, I mean, yes, I'd like to sit here and say I would act the same way, but I would not. I'm not going to lie. I mean, if all of that happened in one afternoon, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't fathom. It says, at that point, Job got up, tore his robe, and he shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and worshipped and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. You know, we never know how you're going to respond to something like that until it happens. And Job chose to worship God. Notice, he didn't say the Lord took, and he said the Lord gave. So that there he's praising God for the things that he had. You know, whatever amount, the short time that we have with someone or something or possession, whatever it is, he is honoring God right there. He is honoring his sovereignty and his generosity by gave. It's something he gave to me. And again, that's
He didn't say, well, let's gather everybody together and go get even.
yeah.
You know, and I'm kind of like you. That probably would be my reaction if somebody
Mm-hmm.
killed all 7 of your sons and
Right.
daughters and all your sheep and everything you own.
Yeah.
That would be a natural, I don't know to say that or not, a natural reaction. It's
Mhm.
not a reaction that God would want.
No, it's a human reaction. Yeah.
And a human
Yeah.
reaction
Yeah.
is we were wanting to get even with them.
Right. That's
So
right.
he took the approach that, you know, God has blessed me with this.
He went the extra mile,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Well, his idea was God is in control.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Right. So again, we go to chapter 2 and much of the same. There's another round of an attack, if you will. But notice that Satan has to gain permission before he can do this. You know, he has to get permission from God. And verse 3 there, it says, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. And Satan says, skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hand, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out and from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores or boils from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. So he still held his integrity through this attack. You know, he's lost his health. He's very painful, sounds like.
One thing you see in this is that it shows you the tools Satan uses to cause us to turn our back on God, and it shows us the goodness of God.
Right.
So sometimes we forget the power that Satan has
Yeah, and especially what he,
to affect our lives.
yeah, and then how he, here next, you know, he's lost his kids, he's lost everything else, and now his wife turns against him. And, you know, she tells him, you know, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. And he maintains his integrity here, and he says, you're talking foolish. He said,
I think she said that because she couldn't stand to watch him being pained, but she was in pain.
I mean, she did just lose her children too, you know, so, yeah, I thought of that too. Yeah, just curse him and die, she said.
She's the reverse of Job.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
she did the humanistic thing.
Yep.
He's
But
doing
you
the
notice,
spiritual.
when she said do it, she didn't say, I'm gonna curse God and die.
Yeah, she told
She
him.
told her husband
Right.
to do it. So.
And that's a good
it's
point.
little selfish in her,
Yeah.
and I know that he had the affliction, but still, she had lost everything. Why didn't you say, let's both curse God and both of us die? Let's just go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it may have been out of love. You know, that's a good point. I don't. So those are the two main attacks that we've had on Job so far, and now comes in the end of chapter 2 there, the introduction of 3 of Job's friends, and this is kind of where we skip a lot here. So basically, the chapters 3 through about 33, something like that. That is Job and his 3 friends going back and forth, and you can call them friends, if you will, with hash marks. They want to. Basically, they put the blame on Job, and you know, in the first part of the chapter, or the first part of chapter 1 there, and God said he is blameless and upright. So we know his character, what God said, but they want to, you know, they're trying to say, Job, you had to do something. You know, this catastrophe, this just doesn't happen to somebody that's good.
But you know what, that's what you said at the beginning. You said, and they're seeing this from their perspective.
Mhm.
They're not seeing it from God's perspective, because they didn't have the insight that Job didn't have either.
Right,
They didn't get to see what was going on behind the curtain.
right,
And everything would have been totally different. But Job did, he had built a life depending on God and saying God's responsible for everything I have.
hmm
It's God that's, and, you know, do you let go?
yeah,
You do what you're trained to do. That's what they're doing. That's what his wife is doing. But Job
it's like he has a short memory. He's
hung on to God
yeah,
for his life, for
Yeah.
his lifetime.
right,
It's kind of like, we put ourselves in that position. Said, I'm gonna be Job, and then 3 of my best friends show up,
hmm
and they're trying to tell me I did something wrong. You know, they're in essence wanting them to curse God, die, or move on. you
Right.
know. There's something, but why are they there to begin with? You know, you wonder about that.
When they come, you know, it starts out they came,
What are friends for if they need to come and tell you, you know, you need to curse God
Yeah.
and die, you know?
you know, it talked about the first week that they were there together. They were good friends because they sat and they listened, and you know, they listened to Job and listened to everything, and so there it's Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. That's the 3 friends, and you know, in chapter 3 is Job speaking of, you know, he has like Brother Tim said, he was a blessed man. He'd always blessed God, and he has a bit of a short memory here. He's, you know, he had always known these amazing things, but it was hard to remember the suffering, or it's hard to remember those good things when you're suffering. And that's kind of where Job is at in these next several chapters with these friends. And again, like you said, Brother Tim, they didn't have the knowledge that God had, obviously, but they were still. It was, you know, something. He had to do something for this to happen to him. Is what these several chapters go over. Now, you know, it was easier for them to analyze than to empathize with Job. Like you said, they didn't have that knowledge, so they just, I mean, they were hard on him. And at one point, one talked about, I believe, his children. He wished, you know, talked about his children dying, and just awful. They were not friends at all. And it's, again, it was easier for them to analyze than to empathize, because to show empathy to somebody, you have to put yourself in their position, and they were not willing to do that. So after these friends are gone, we have another friend, if you will, that comes in, Elihu, and it's somewhere around chapter 34 where Elihu comes in. And Elihu, you know, it starts out, he was, sorry, I got ahead just a minute. Let me back up. Let me back up to chapter 28. Chapter 28 through 31 is Job's final speeches. And I think you can sum up the whole book in one verse, and that's Job 28:28. I think that kind of encompasses everything that we're to learn from this book. And he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. And, you know, and all those things that he's facing, that is, that's what Job held on to. That Job, it's just amazing. It's amazing what he went through and was still able to hold on to his integrity. And then,
You know what amazes me about this is God, in, I don't want to be running ahead of you, but in all of this, God understands what he's going through.
mhm,
And God's going to deal with it. But it's okay when you're going through this kind of suffering, is to want to know why.
right,
It's okay for
It-
us to do that.
that's right. It's okay to question that, and as long as it's done in the right way, I guess.
Because when it's over, he's still blameless.
Right.
That never changed. He's just human.
Right. So the Elihu, he was, I read a little bit about him, and a lot of the statements that Elihu was saying about Job were false, but he did have a few things in there that he talked about God, and those were true. He talked about God's righteousness in his few chapters, how God was impartial and omniscient, and so he did speak some truth. However, again, he was accusing Job of much of the same as the other three guys, and toward the last chapter of Elihu's speeches, he's talking about a storm approaching. And I really don't think, in everything that I studied, he actually knew that what was fixing to happen next. They believe a storm was actually approaching, and God himself was in this whirlwind again. You know, whirlwind at the beginning ruined his family, and now this whirlwind is coming toward the end. And we get to that chapter of 38, and this is when the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind or the tornado. And again, you know, Elihu mentioned the whirlwind coming, but he didn't know what was fixing to happen. He didn't know how powerful this was fixing to be, and you know, it had been such a big argument between Job and his friends and Elihu, and now God is fixing to come, and he's fixing to settle the score, and let's see. You know, he wants. How did Job want God to answer him, you think? I think Job wanted him to say, Job, you're right, your friends were wrong. Or his friends probably wanted God to say, Job, you were wrong. You were right. But ultimately he does neither. And so notice here in verse 1, the Lord answered Job. He says, Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? He's talking to Job. He's not talking directly to Job's friends, none of the other friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and all them and so forth, and not Elihu. God is answering Job. And, I think during all of everything that was going on, Job was the only one out of all of them that cried out to God, looking for answers. They didn't. But Job was the only one that cried out to God. And so you think about the whirlwind. It's a tornado we talked about, winds going everywhere and things being picked up and driven around. And it's unimaginable nature that reflects the nature of God. And the whirlwind is mentioned several times in the book, in the Bible. A few that I found was Psalm 77, is mentioned in Nahum, Isaiah 66, and Jeremiah chapter 4, Jeremiah 23. Tells us that, God's coming is like a whirlwind, and we're not surprised that God appeared to in Ezekiel also in a whirlwind. And, a lot of Job's calamities that we talked about, it began with the whirlwind. And but back to 38, finally Job he got his wish. God has appeared, and he confronts Job. And what happens in the next couple of chapters is a massive challenges, a massive questions. And like I say, these are in forms of questions. I think anywhere from 66 to 70, 80 questions, 77, I think, or somewhere in there, for Job to reveal his knowledge or his lack thereof, I think, so to speak. And so the intent of those questions to Job is not to answer the problem of why is this happening to me? Why is all this suffering? But it's to lead Job to the understanding of God's great design and our dependence on Him and His plans for us to prosper. Brother Tim has preached the past few Sundays, about the heart. And I think one of those you talked about was a trusting heart. And, studying this book of Job, he had to have a trusting heart. And actually, I went back and looked at those 25 types of hearts that you had. If y'all still have that list, if you went through the book of Job and looked at those 25 hearts, I think you find every one of them in the book of Job at some point with Job. It was amazing. But we're gonna start on chapter 38 next week and we'll finish the book out with that and bring it home.